All right, so I was servicing my Wisconsin-powered air compressor. It's a pretty good-sized Champion compressor with a Wisconsin vh4d. This thing, I used it for several hours in some fairly heavy dust. And, well, I'll show you when it's all back together, but it's got an oil bath air cleaner that sits right here. And granted, it's not like this thing was on a baler or whatever, but right here in the corner where like the blower housing leaks a little bit of air, you can see the junk that it has blown onto the side of the clutch there. And that was approximately 5 hours of use-ish. Maybe less than that, maybe 4 or something. So certainly it was working in some dusty environments, not as bad as a baler, but worse than some anyways. And I was very, very curious to take a look at the oil bath air cleaner and see how this was doing. This is like owning this air compressor here with this oil bath on it is my only experience at using a oil bath air cleaner in a heavy dust environment. And just reading around on the internet and what have you and talking to people in person, I personally have got very mixed reviews, if you will, from people. Some people say that they're absolute fucking garbage and they're not worth a damn, and the only reason that the old engines had it was they had, you know, quote unquote looser tolerances and could handle more contamination. And other people say that an oil bath air cleaner is the bee's knees and what have you and all sorts of shit. What I have noticed watching videos and what have you, talking to people and the couple oil baths that I've seen myself, like in situ, if you will, is that the vast majority of people do not maintain them like they're supposed to be. And, we'll get into what that means here in a second. This one, however, I have maintained properly, and I got it in very, very good condition. And I guess show you what the bottom side of this thing looks like. So very clean, nice clean oil and what have you. Oh, that is a bitch for it to focus on. But hopefully you get an idea. That this thing is very clean and well maintained. Which is not the case, it seems, with most people. This thing, when I got it, it did not have a pre-cleaner on top of it. I actually added this pre-cleaner. And a pre-cleaner, in my mind, is extremely important because the way it makes sense in my head anyways would be that an oil bath air cleaner would be extremely good at dealing with fine dust and small particles, but not necessarily dealing with larger stuff. And a lot of the videos and what have you that I see online on YouTube are people with ill-maintained oil bath air cleaners on tractors that don't have a pre-cleaner on it, and the bottom, or the filter element, if you will, of the oil bath, the steel wool, essentially just gets totally plugged with all sorts of junk. So this is what I tipped out of the pre-cleaner bowl just now, and like I said, this was about 4 hours or so of use. But if I look at the oil cup, you can see, yeah, sure, there's, you know, a little bit of stuff in there, but there's actually more junk in the pre-cleaner than there is the oil cup. I really kind of forget where I left off there, but yeah, all that shit that I poured out was just out of the pre-cleaner bowl, and you know, so that never made it to the oil bath in the first place. So that really speaks to, you know, how good a properly sized pre-cleaner works anyways. And the self-ejecting pre-cleaners, yeah, I know, get your mind out of the gutter. The self-ejecting pre-cleaners are actually more efficient than these bowl-type ones. On Donaldson's catalog, I think it rates the efficiency of the bowl types at like 80% or something, and some of their self-ejecting pre-cleaners as high as like, well, some of their self-ejecting scavenging pre-cleaners I think as high as like 95% or something. But I guess actually thinking of that, looking at the, you know, amount of dust that we found in the bowl versus what kind of looked like was in the oil cup, yeah, you know, maybe about 80% or so. And like right here, the base of the pre-cleaner, there's a little bit of dust built up on there. So if we account for that stuff and what have you too, yeah, you know, probably about 80% in the pre-cleaner bowl. But so I brake cleaned out the oil cup and blew out with air the pre-cleaner bowl, and I guess I'll put this together here and try and explain how this works anyways. So the oil cup is really, as it sounds, it's a cup, bowl, whatever, with oil in it, and then there's this, I have no idea, baffle, I guess you would call, with a couple different holes in it that would go into here like so, and then says oil level. And so on one hand, probably any oil of a appropriate viscosity would work, but I use not specifically Valvoline, but I use 30 weight non-detergent oil, theory being that a non-detergent oil will help allow contamination in the oil to settle out, where a detergent oil will hold the contamination in suspension. And riveting footage, I know. Fill up the oil to the appropriate level, and then that oil cup goes on the bottom side of the assembly here. And so the way that this section here flows is that the dirty air will come in through the center here and out this tube here. The air will make a 180 degree, hold this in a way that makes sense. Air comes out of the center tube, makes a 180 degree turn, and goes up through the steel wool, pulling some of the oil with it. And that steel wool packing runs all the way from here to this line right here, as you can see in there. And this guy mounts vertically as such, because of course, like, otherwise all the oil would leak out. And as the dirty air is coming in through the center and like splashes up on the inside. For one, theory being that the dirt particles are heavier than the air and they want to continue going straight, where the air needs to make the 180-degree turn. And so in theory, for one, the dirt will go straight and get caught in, like, hit the baffle. But even if it does make that turn, because relatively speaking, a large volume of oil gets drawn up into the steel wool, that any dirt that's left in there will get trapped in the oil on the steel wool while the engine's at, you know, full throttle. And then when the engine revs down, all the oil will drain back down. Well, not all the oil, but a majority of the oil will drain back down into the oil cup. And then as the engine, you know, revs up and what have you, the cycle continues. I did hear somebody say that these things don't filter at idle, and I don't really agree with that. On one hand, you know, this is not, like, these cleaners are not something that I'm very familiar with. I don't have, you know, hardly any experience running these, but I'll show you a video. I'll take a video actually looking down through here with the thing running, and when it's at full throttle, the airflow will, like, displace the oil on that baffle, and you'll be able to see just the bare baffle. But when it's at idle, you can actually see oil down there because the oil, like, flows back in. So while I would imagine that it'd be totally true that these, you know, work better and clean more effectively at their maximum airflow, so long as you don't go below their rated minimum airflow, I would imagine it would still filter just fine, or clean the air just fine. And yeah, I guess just once again, you can see how clean this one is on the inside. Now, of course, they stopped making oil bath air cleaners, and to my knowledge, nothing, well, it's not true. I think you can still get a Honda GX engine with an oil bath air cleaner. But even then, I'm sure you'd have to, like, special order it, but I do believe Honda still offers a oil bath air cleaner for the GX series. But in normal everyday life, nothing comes with an oil bath air cleaner anymore, and there are several reasons for that. One, they were more maintenance intensive. Building the original air cleaner was more expensive for the manufacturer to build that oil bath air cleaner than to, say, just make a plastic housing that you shove a paper element air filter into. Also, I'm sure one factor of why they got away from these is that they can know the manufacturer cannot sell you replacement elements for the air cleaner. You know, this takes about a pint of oil, rather than being able to charge you for a replacement air filter. Another reason, though, too, is that these, like, aspirate, if you will, oil into the intake. I've kind of already wiped this out in here. But hopefully it comes across that there is a little bit of oil in the intake on this thing, and unfortunately there's, like, a little bit of rust on the boot. But you can see that it is quite clean in there. Those white specks on there are not dirt. They're almost like, I don't know, talcum powder or something from the rubber boots. And yeah, like I was saying, you know, you kind of get an idea of how dirty of an environment this thing was working in, because that was only about 4 hours of use. And so there it is, all assembled back on the engine. Where I was getting at with the oil in the intake is that the oil in the intake would be bad for emissions. Like, an engine that burns oil will create higher emissions than one that does not. And of course, everything nowadays is regulated or dictated by emissions. And I mean, there are other pros and cons and trade-offs to these oil baths. Obviously, it's a more time-intensive and messy job than just taking out a paper air filter, throwing in the trash, and replacing it. And it does require more care and give a fuck factor to do it appropriately. You know, for instance, I've read a lot of people online saying that they use used motor oil in the air cleaners. On one hand, maybe that's good enough for your application, but for this engine, I don't want good enough. I want to take the best care of the engine that I possibly can. It's in fantastic shape right now, and I want to keep it that way as long as I can. And I mean, you know, it takes a pint of oil every now and again, so you know, it maybe cost me $2. Well, okay, maybe $5. You know, a squirt of brake, or $3. A squirt of brake clean and $2 in oil or something like that. Like, these aren't necessarily expensive to service or whatever, but just to show it. Well, and maybe I need to put just a skosh more in there. Just put, shit, half an ounce or something more in there. Not very much, but a little bit. And if you were to underfill one of these, then they wouldn't filter as effectively, wouldn't clean the air as effectively, and has a greater chance of passing dust into the engine. And if you were to put too much oil in one of these, it would draw more air or more oil through the filter element and potentially pass more oil into the engine. But okay, so the way the airflow in this works, now that I've got it all assembled here, is that because I have the pre-cleaner on here, and it originally came with just a rain cap with a very coarse wire screen on it that was only good for keeping very large debris out. You know, even then I'm sure insects and crap could get in there. Which, granted, there's not actually a screen on this one. There's just these little fins under here that I'll show in a second. If you look at engines that are like on balers and what have you, because these Wisconsins were very common to see on balers, they'll have a pre-cleaner, but then also this like wire mesh screen underneath the pre-cleaner. On one hand, it'd be kind of neat to add that. On the other hand, I run in dusty environments, not necessarily a bunch of chaff and shit blowing around in the air, so I don't really see a need for that, although they do look pretty cool. Anyways, the way airflow works with the pre-cleaner is that it'll come up through these little turbine stators, or whatever the shit that you want to call it, on the bottom of the pre-cleaner. The air will first come up and make a 180-degree turn and go down into the center of the oil bath. The reason for these fins is that it'll swirl the air around the pre-cleaner, and I'll show you in a second the shape of the pre-cleaner bowl. Like centrifugally will separate out a lot of the contaminants into the pre-cleaner bowl, and then the pre-cleaned air goes down. It goes down the center of the oil bath air cleaner, makes another 180-degree turn, brings up the oil with the air into the like steel wool filter media, and then out the back. Yeah, okay, you can see it out the back through that hard line there into the carburetor. If we pull the lid off the pre-cleaner, these were the stator vanes, or whatever you want to call it, that spin the air. And then if we look at the pre-cleaner shape, it's got like a inverted cone, inverted funnel, whatever. And so as the air is coming up through the center of here, it is spun, and then will spin through, like, will be spinning up through the center here, and then actually like come out the top, sling itself to the outside, and then fall down into the bottom of the cup here. When these things are running, you can actually watch dust and shit like swirling around in there. And even though this is actually a very new pre-cleaner bowl, you know, it's only got 4 or 5 hours of use on it, you can see that it's actually like clouded over. And the reason for that is that it's actually scratched up because of all the debris rotating around it here. It's actually scratched and scuffed this plastic. When these are brand new, they're like totally transparent, like a you know, welding clear lens or whatever. And because the air is rotating as it comes through here, you can see this side. Is it? Okay, yeah, you can see it. This side is clean, where this side is dirty. Well, yeah, maybe you can see. But it's because the air rotates as it goes through here, so it'll like impact this wall right here. So yeah, I'll get you a shot looking down through here as the engine's. Okay, so this is looking top down, looking into the oil bath here, like so. And so because it's not running at the moment, you can see the top side of the baffle, if we're going to call it. Of course, right now it's not running. You won't be able to hear once I do have it running, but I will fire it up, show you it at idle, and then I'll rev it up, and you'll actually be able to watch the oil displaced by the air on top of that baffle as it revs up. So that first little bit there, I was actually running just the engine and wasn't actually turning the belts that power the air compressor. Because this thing has a clutch on it, you can actually turn just the engine and not the air compressor at the same time. But that wasn't drawing enough, or that wasn't putting enough load on the engine to draw enough airflow to clean the oil away from that baffle. And then the second clip there, I had the clutch engaged, turning the air compressor, and then it was actually able to clean the oil off the baffle. And it's cool, I guess. You could see the little bit of debris in the oil from when I was getting my dirty dick beaters in there to kind of like on that top casting of the pre-cleaner to show you the dust that was on there. I knocked some of that dust into the oil here, and it was kind of neat that you could see it. And so you can see the drip in here. That's the oil dripping down from the filter element, or the steel wool, now that the engine is shut off. And I don't actually see those chunks of debris there anymore, but I guess it was kind of neat to see it through the top there. I was thinking about it earlier that if I had more money and more time than I do, it would be really neat, just for curiosity's sake, to have a transparent oil bath air cleaner made. You know, maybe like, I don't know, could a glass blower guy make a oil bath air cleaner but entirely out of glass, so that you could actually watch the oil like moving through the cleaner? I just think that would be really interesting to see. But you know, I'm sure that'd be very, very expensive to have something like that custom made, just for curiosity's sake. Okay, yeah, I could like cut a window out or something and put, you know, a piece of Lexan over it or whatever, but I don't have an oil bath air cleaner that I'd be willing to sacrifice to do that. But I think these things are fascinating personally. Just the theory concept of how they work, how on one hand, how simple they are. It's a metal canister with oil and steel wool in it, and yet it actually does a fantastic job of cleaning air. But on the other hand, how incredibly complex they are in the sense of all the different stampings. And if you think of all the tooling that is behind making all this stuff, all the, you know, big machines and presses, in order to stamp all these pieces of metal, I don't know, it's just very, very interesting and curious to me, these things, and I just like the older stuff and what have you too. So I'm using 30 weight engine oil in here. That's what the owner's manual says for the current temperature conditions, which is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit to about 100 degrees Fahrenheit at the moment. If it were colder, then of course thinner oil would be good, and if it's hotter than 100 degrees, I'm just not going to run this thing, because no sense in beating on something like this. Oh, I guess while we're here, and for my own curiosity and maybe yours, we'll take a look at the air filter that I have on the air compressor pump. At first glance, that looks very much like an oil bath, although you notice that the airflow is reversed. The dirty air comes in through the side and the clean air out through the center. It's actually a paper element air cleaner, although it looks like an oil bath, I believe, because it was intended to replace an oil bath. And so we have a cup that looks like an oil cup, but it actually says in big bold letters, "Do not use oil. Remove this baffle to empty dust. Be sure element retaining nut is tight." All this is like a catch basin for any dust that is separated. And so like as this runs, this will get filled up with dust, and you have to open it up every now and again. It says top because if this was to be mounted, if the filter assembly was mounted horizontally, you would want this at the top because that's where the cutout is for this baffle here. And so presumably it could fill all the way with dust before really needing to be serviced. But I'm going to pop the paper element out of there and see how that's looking. And so on this one, the pre-cleaner works identical to the oil bath. And then as the dirty pre-cleaned air comes into the top of the housing there, the filter element sits in there. Dirty air comes in on the top side of these fins, and the fins will spin the air. And same concept as the pre-cleaner, it'll sling the contamination to the outside. And a fair amount of dust will get caught in this cup here, and then any remaining dust is caught by the filter element, and it's a pretty bog standard filter element otherwise that is looking quite clean. And I don't see anything passing to the inside. So that is very, very good. But, yeah, for what it's worth, and the off chance that somebody's interested in this shit, it's kind of a crappy video, crappy overview of how an oil bath air cleaner works, and at least somewhat of an example of how a well-maintained one does in heavy, dusty conditions.